For a long time we had little or no intercourse with the admiral. One thought that ill humor had perhaps dictated his answer, and others supposed that he was fearful the letter might contain some complaints against him, but the admiral knew the emperor too well not to be aware that he would never appeal to any other tribunal than to that of the nations. I, who knew what would have been the subject of the letter, felt the most lively indignation at it. The sole intention of the emperor had been to employ this method, the only one that seemed compatible with his dignity, to write to his wife and obtain tidings of his son. However, the Grand Marshal replied to the admiral that he was either overstepped or misinterpreted his instructions, that his determination could only be regarded as another instance of flagrant vexation, that the condition imposed was too much beneath the dignity of the emperor as well as that of the Prince of Wales for him to retain any intention of writing. The frigate that had just arrived was the Spy, bringing the European papers to the 31st December. They contain the execution of the unfortunate Marshal Ney and the escape of Lavalette. Ney, said the emperor, as ill attacked as defended, has been condemned by the Chamber of Peers in the teeth of a formal capitulation. His execution had been allowed to take place. That was another error. From that moment, he became a martyr. That Labodoyer should not have been pardoned because the clemency extended to him would have seemed only a predilection in favor of the old aristocracy might be conceived, but the pardon of Ney would only have been a proof of the strength of the government and the moderation of the prince. It will be said perhaps an example was necessary, but the marshal would become so much more certainly by a pardon after being degraded by a sentence. It was to him, in fact, moral death that deprived him of all influence, and nevertheless the object of authority would be obtained, the sovereign satisfied, the example complete. The refusal of pardon of Lavalette and his escape were new subjects of animadversion, equally unpopular. But the saloons in Paris, he observed, exhibited the same passions as the clubs. The nobility were a new version of the Jacobins. Europe, moreover, was in a state of complete anarchy. The code of political immorality was openly followed. Whatever fell into the hands of the sovereigns was turned to the advantage of each of them. At least in my time, I was the butt of all the accusations of this kind. The sovereigns then talked of nothing but principles and virtue. But now, added he, that they are victorious and without control, they practice unblushingly all the wrongs which they themselves then reprobated. What resources and what hope were there then left for nations and for morality? Our countrywomen, at least, he observed, have rendered their sentiments illustrious. Madame Labodoyer was on the point of dying from grief, and these papers show us that Madame Ney has displayed the most courageous and determined devotion. Madame Lavalette is become the heroine of Europe. The 16th, the emperor had quitted the Encyclopedia Britannica to take his lessons in English in the Annual Register. He read there the adventure of a Mr. Spencer Smith, arrested at Venice, ordered to be sent to Valenciennes, and who made his escape on the road. This must be a very simple affair, said the emperor, which the narrator has converted into a statement of importance. The circumstance was totally unknown to him. It was a detail of police of too little consequence, he observed, to have found its way up to him. About 4 o'clock, the captain of the Spy arrived from Europe, and the captain of the Ceylon, about to sail for England, were presented to the emperor. He was in low spirits. He was unwell. The audience of the first was very short. That of the second would have been the same, had he not roused the emperor by asking if we had any letters to send to Europe. The emperor then desired me to ask him if he should see the Prince Regent. On his answering in the affirmative, I was charged to inform him that the emperor was desirous of writing to the Prince Regent, but that in consequence of the observation of the admiral that he would open the letter, he had abstained from it as being inconsistent with his dignity and with that of the Prince Regent himself, that he said indeed heard the laws of England much boasted of, but that he could not discover their benefits anywhere, that he had only now to expect, indeed to desire, an executioner, that the torture they made him endure was inhuman, savage, that it would have been more open and energetic to put him to death. The emperor made me request to the captain that he would take upon him to deliver these words, and dismissed him. He looked very red and was very much embarrassed. The 17th, an English colonel arrived from the Cape on his return from the Isle of France, came in the morning and addressed himself to me to try to get an introduction to the emperor. The admiral had only allowed his vessels to remain 2 or 3 hours in the road. Having prevailed on the emperor to receive him at 4 o'clock, he assured me that he would rather miss his vessel than lose such an opportunity. The emperor was not very well. He had passed several hours in his bath. At 4 he received the colonel. The emperor put many questions to him concerning the Isle of France, lately ceded to the English. It seems that its prosperity and its commerce suffer from its change of sovereignty. After the departure of the colonel, being alone with the emperor in the garden, I told him that his person seemed to have remained very dear to the inhabitants of the Isle of France, that the colonel had informed me that the name of Napoleon was never pronounced there, but with commiseration. It was precisely on the day of a great festival in the colony that they learned his departure from France and his arrival at Plymouth. The theater was to be universally attractive. The news have arrived during the day. In the evening there was not a single colonist, either white or of color, in the house. There were only some English who were exceedingly confused and irritated at the circumstance. The emperor listened to me. "It is quite plain," said he, after some moments of silence. "This proves that the inhabitants of the Isle of France have continued French. I am the country. They love it. It has been wounded in my person. They are grieved at it." I added that the change of dominion, restraining their expressions, they did not dare to propose his health publicly, but that the colonel said they never neglected it, notwithstanding they drank to him. This word had become consecrated to Napoleon. These details touched him. "Poor Frenchman," he said with an expression, "poor people, poor nation. I deserved all that. I loved thee. But thou surely didst not deserve all the ills that press upon thee. Thou didst merit well that one should devote himself to thee. But what infamy, what baseness, what degradation! It must be confessed. I had about me," and addressing himself to me, he added, "I do not speak here of your friends or of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, for with respect to them it is another matter. There frequently reached us incidents and expressions which, like those from the Ile of France, were calculated to excite emotion in the heart. The island of Ascension in our neighborhood had always been desert and abandoned. Since we have been here, the English have thought proper to form an establishment there. The captain who went to take possession of it told us on his return that he was much astonished on landing to find upon the beach, 'May the great Napoleon live forever.' In the last papers that reached us, among many good-natured sallies and jeux de mots, it was remarked in several languages that Paris would never be happy till his Helena should be restored to him. These were a few drops of honey in our cup of wormwood." The 18th through the 19th, the emperor was on horseback by 8 o'clock. He had abstained from it for a long time. Wanted space to ride over was the cause. His health suffers visibly in consequence, and it is astonishing that the want of exercise is not still more hurtful to him, who was in the daily habit of taking it to a violent degree. On our return, the emperor breakfasted out of doors. He detained us all after breakfast. The conversation fell on Herculaneum and Pompeii, the phenomenon and epoch of their destruction, the time and the accident of their modern discovery, the monuments, and the curiosities they have since afforded us. The emperor said that if Rome had remained under his dominion, he would have risen again from her ruins. He intended to have cleared away all the rubbish, to have restored as much as possible, etc. He did not doubt that the same spirit extending through all the vicinity. It might have been in some degree the same with Herculaneum and Pompeii. Breakfast being concluded, the emperor sent my son to bring the volume of Crevier which contains this event, and he read it to us, as well as the death and character pleading. He retired about noon to take some rest towards 6 o'clock. We took our usual round in the carriage. The emperor took with him Mr. and Mrs. Skelton, who were come to visit him. On our return, the emperor, banished from the garden on account of the damp, went to see General Gourgaud, who was recovering rapidly. After dinner, on leaving the table and returning to the drawing room, we could not help reverting to the meal we had just made. Literally nothing was fit to eat. The bread bad, the wine not drinkable, the meat disgusting and unwholesome. We are frequently obliged to send it back again. They continue, in spite of our remonstrances, to send it us dead, because by that method they can put upon us such animals as have died naturally. The emperor, shocked at this description, could not refrain from saying with warmth, "No doubt there are still some individuals whose physical situation is still worse, but that circumstance does not deprive us of the right of giving an opinion on our own condition or on the infamous manner in which we are treated. The injustice of the English government has not been contented with sending us hither. It has selected the individuals to whom our persons and our supplies are entrusted. For my part, I should suffer less if I were sure that it would one day be divulged to the whole world in such a way as to brand with infamy those who are guilty of it. But let us talk of something else," said he. "What is the day of the month?" He was told it was the 19th of March. What? The eve of the 20th of March. And a few seconds afterwards, "But let us talk of something else." He sent for a volume of Racine, and at first began to read the comedy of the Platers. But after a scene or two, he turned to Britannicus, which he read to us. When the reading was concluded and the due tribute of admiration had been paid, he said that Racine was censured for making the denouement of this piece too sudden, that the poisoning of Britannicus was not expected so early in the play, as it ought to have been. He praised the truth of the character of Narcissus highly, observing that it was always by wounding the self-love of princes that their determinations were most influenced. The 20th. After dinner, one of us observed to the emperor that he had been less solitary, less quiet that day, 12th at the same hour. "I was sitting down to the table at the Tuileries," said the emperor. "I had found it difficult to get there. The dangers I went through in that attempt were at least equal to those of a battle. In fact, he had been seized upon on his arrival by thousands of officers and citizens. One party had snatched him from another. He had been carried to the palace, and amidst a tumult like that of a mob about to tear a man to pieces, instead of the orderly and respectful attendance of a multitude intent on showing their venerations for an individual. But we ought to look at the sentiment and intention in this case. It was enthusiasm and love carried to a pitch that resembled delirious rage." The emperor added that in all probability more than one person in Europe would talk of him that evening, and that in spite of all observation, many a bottle would be emptied in his cause. The conversation then turned on the King of Rome. That day was the anniversary of his birth. The emperor reckoned that he must be 5 years old. He then spoke of the accouchement of the empress and seemed to take some pleasure in boasting that he had proved himself on that occasion as good a husband as any in the world. He assisted the empress to walk about all night. We who were of the household knew something of the matter. We had all been called together at the palace at 10 in the evening. We passed the night there, and the cries of the empress sometimes reached our ears. Towards morning, the accoucheur having told the emperor that the pains had ceased and that the labor might yet be tedious, the emperor went into a bath and sent us away, desiring us, however, not to go from home. The emperor had not been long in the bath when the pains came on again, and the accoucheur ran to him, almost out of his wits, saying that he was the most unfortunate of men, that out of 1,000 labors in Paris there was not one more difficult. The emperor, dressing himself again as fast as he could, encouraged him, saying that a man who understood his business ought never to lose his presence of mind, that there was nothing in this case that he ought to be uneasy about, that he had only to fancy he was delivering a citizen's wife of the Rue Saint-Denis, that nature had but one law, that he was sure he would act for the best, and, above all, that he need not fear any reproach. It was then represented to the emperor that there was great danger either for the mother or the child. "If the mother lives," said he without hesitation, "I shall have another child. Act in this case as if you were attending the birth of a cobbler's son." When he reached The Empress, she really was in danger. The child presented itself in an unfavorable position, and there was every reason to fear it would be stifled. The Emperor asked Dubois why he did not deliver her. He excused himself, being unwilling to do it, he said, except in the presence of Corvisart, who had not yet arrived. But what can he tell you, said the Emperor. If it is a witness or justification you want to secure, here am I. Then Dubois, taking off his coat, commenced the operation. When the Empress saw the instruments, she cried out in a piteous manner, claiming that they were going to kill her. She was strongly held by the Emperor, Madame de Montesquieu Corvisart, who had just come in, etc. Madame de Montesquieu dexterously took an opportunity to encourage her by declaring that she herself had more than once been in the same situation. The Empress, however, still persuaded herself that she was treated differently from other women and often repeated, "Am I to be sacrificed because I'm an Empress?" She declared afterwards to the Emperor that she really had entertained this fear. At length she was delivered. The danger had been so imminent, said the Emperor, that all the etiquette which had been studied and ordered was disregarded, and the child put on one side on the floor whilst everyone was occupied about the mother only. The infant remained some moments in this situation, and it was thought he was dead. It was Corvisart who took him up, chafed him, and brought him to utter a cry, etc. The 21st through the 22nd. The Emperor rode out very early. We made the tour of our limits in several directions. It is during these rides that the Emperor now takes his English lesson. I walk by his side. He speaks a few sentences in English, which I translate word for word as he pronounces them, by which method he perceives when he is understood, or is enabled to correct his mistakes. When he has finished the sentence, I repeat it to him in English, so that he may understand it well himself. This helps him form his ear. The Emperor was reading today in the Roman history of Catiline's conspiracy. He could not comprehend it in the way in which it was described. However great a villain Catiline might be, observed he must have had some object in view. It could not be that of governing Rome, since he is accused of having intended to set fire to the four quarters of that city. The Emperor conceived it to be much more probable that it was some new faction similar to those of Marius and Sylla, which, having failed, all the accusations calculated to incite the hard patriots were, as usual in such cases, heaped on the head of its leader. It was then observed to the Emperor that the same thing would infallibly have happened to himself had he been overpowered in Fontenay, Fructidor, Brumaire, before he had illumined with such radiant brilliancy on horizon, cleared of clouds, the Gracchi gave rise to doubts and suspicions of a very different sort in his mind, which he said became almost certainties to those who had been engaged in the politics of our times. History, he said, presents these Gracchi in the aggregate as seditious people, revolutionists, criminals, and nevertheless allows it to appear in details that they had virtues, that they were gentle, disinterested, moral men, and besides, they were the sons of the illustrious Cornelia, which, to great minds, ought to be a strong primary presumption in their favor. How then can such a contrast be accounted for? It is thus the Gracchi generously devoted themselves for the rights of the oppressed people against a tyrannical Senate, and their great talents and noble character endangered a ferocious aristocracy which triumphed, murdered, and calumniated them. The historians of a party have transmitted their characters in the same spirit under the emperors. It was necessary to continue in the same manner the bare mention of the rights of the people under a despotic master was a blasphemy, a downright crime. Afterwards, the case was the same under the feudal system, which was so fruitful in petty despots. Such, no doubt, is a fatality which has attended the memory of the Gracchi throughout succeeding ages. Their virtues have never ceased to be considered crimes, but at this day, when possessed of better information, we have thought it expedient to reason the Gracchi may and ought to find favor in our eyes in that terrible struggle between the aristocracy and democracy, which has been renewed in our times, in that exasperation of ancient territory against modern industry, which still ferments throughout Europe. There's no doubt but that if the aristocracies triumph for force, it would point out many Gracchi in all directions and treat them as mercilessly as its predecessors have done, the Gracchi of Rome. The emperor added that it was moreover easy to see that there was a hiatus in the ancient authors at this period of history, that all which the moderns now presented to us on this subject was mere gleaning. He then reverted to the charges already made against honest Roland and his pupil Crevier. They were both devoid of talent, system, or coloring. It was to be allowed that the ancients were far superior to us in this point, and that because amongst them the statesmen were literary men, and the men of letters statesmen. They combine professions whilst we divide them absolutely. This famous division of labor, which in our times produces such perfection in mechanical arts, is quite fatal to excellence in mental productions. Every work of genius is superior in proportion to the universality of the mind whence it emanates. We owe to the emperor the attempt to establish this principle by frequently employing men on various objects wholly unconnected with each other. It was his system. He once appointed of his own accord one of his chamberlains to go into Illyria to liquidate the Austrian debt. This was a matter of importance and extremely complicated. The chamberlain, who had previously been a total stranger to public business, was alarmed, and the minister, who had been deprived of this appointment, being satisfied with it, ventured to represent to the emperor that his nomination having fallen on a man entirely new to such matters, it might be feared that he would not acquit himself satisfactorily. "I have a lucky hand, sir," was his answer. "Those on whom I lay it are fit for everything." The emperor, proceeding in his criticism, also censured severely what he called historical fooleries, ridiculously exalted by translators and commentators. Such things prove, in the first place, said he, that the historians formed erroneous judgments of men and circumstances. They are wrong, for instance, said Napoleon, when they applaud so highly the continence of Scipio, and fall into ecstasies at the calmness of Alexander Caesar and others for having been able to sleep on the eve of a battle. It could only be a monk debarred from women, whose face brightens up at the very name, who neighs beyond the iron bars of his window at their approach, who could give Scipio much credit for forbearing to violate the female whom chance threw into his power, while he had so many others entirely at his disposal. A famished man might as well praise the hero for having quietly passed by a table covered with victuals without greedily snatching at them, as to sleeping just before a battle. There was not, he assured us, one of our soldiers or generals who had not 20 times performed that miracle. Their heroism was chiefly produced by the fatigues of the day before. Here the Grand Marshal added that he could safely say he had seen Napoleon sleep, not only on the eve of an engagement, but even during the battle. "I was obliged to do so," said Napoleon. "When I fought battles that lasted 3 days, nature was also to have her due. I took advantage of the smallest intervals and slept where and when I could." He slept on the field of battle at Wagram and at Bautzen, even during the action, and completely within the range of the enemy's balls. On this subject, he said that independently of the necessity of obeying nature, these slumbers afforded a general commanding a very great army the important advantages of enabling him to await calmly the reports and combinations of all his divisions, instead of perhaps being hurried away by the only event which he himself could witness. The emperor farther said that he found in Roland and even Caesar circumstances of the Gallic war which he could not understand. He could not by any means comprehend the invasion of the Helvetii, the road they took, the object ascribed to them, the time they spent in crossing the Saône, the diligence of Caesar, who found time to go to Italy as far as Aquileia to seek the legions and overtook the invaders before they had passed to Saône, etc. That it was equally difficult to comprehend what was meant by establishing winter quarters that extended from Treves to Vennes. And as we expressed our surprise at the immense works the generals got performed by their soldiers at ditches, walls, great towers, galleries, etc., the emperor observed that in those times every exertion was directed to constructions on the spot, whereas in ours they were employed in conveyance. He also thought the ancient soldiers labored, in fact, more than ours. He had thoughts of dictating something on that subject. Ancient history, however, said he, embraces a long period, and the system of war often changed. In our days it was no longer that of the time of Turenne and Vauban. field works were growing useless. Even the system of our fortresses had become problematical or ineffectual. The enormous quantity of bombs and howitzers changed everything. It was no longer against the horizontal attack that defense was requisite, but also against the curve and the reflected lines. None of the ancient fortresses thenceforth afforded shelter. They ceased to be tenable. No country was rich enough to maintain them. The revenue of France would be insufficient for her lines of Flanders, for the exterior fortifications were now not above a fourth or fifth of the necessary expense. Casemates, magazines, places of shelter secure from the effects of bombs were now requisite and were too expensive. The emperor complained particularly of the weakness of modern masonry. The engineer department is radically defective. In this point, it had cost him immense sums, wholly thrown away. Struck with these novel truths, the emperor had invented a system altogether at variance with the axioms hitherto established. It was to have metal of an extraordinary caliber to advance beyond the principal line towards the enemy, and to have that principal line itself, on the contrary, defended by a great quantity of small, movable artillery. Hence, the enemy would be stopped short in his sudden advance. He would have only weak pieces to attack powerful ones. He would be commanded by this great caliber, round which the resources of the fortress, the small pieces, would form in groups, or even advance to a distance as skirmishers, and might follow all the movements of the enemy by means of their lightness and mobility. The enemy would then stand in need of battering cannon. He would be obliged to open trenches. Some time would be gained, and the true object of fortification accomplished. The emperor employed this method with great success, and to the great astonishment of the engineers in the defense of Vienna and in that of Dresden. He intended to use it in that of Paris, which city could not, he thought, be defended by any other means. But of the success of this method he had no doubt.